Welcome to Season 2 of TaleFeather. I've been moving deliberately, seeking the why. Why we leap, why we stay, and why we serve. This season, we go beyond hospitality and spirits and into the lives of those who orbit this world with passion and purpose. Stories meant to echo inside of you and out into your community. So let's get to flying. Hey folks, welcome back to TaleFeather for Season 2. Nick Crutchfield here. We're changing the season. We're changing it all up. We're changing the format of this podcast. From this point on, this will be about the reason of why, according to the great equalizers. And we've got some really fucking killer stories that are going to come from hospitalitarians all the way over to people that are adjacent to or have been affected by their lives with hospitality. I believe firmly that the third space is the glue of society, one of the greatest glues of society, I should say. And with that, we're going to get started today. I've got a very old friend, very accomplished person, a great friend of mine for a number of years, Mr. Craig Honick. We met each other at the Commonwealth Sky Bar and Lounge, and only in Charlottesville can you call something on the second level of a building a sky bar. But nonetheless, we met each other at the Commonwealth Restaurant and Sky Bar in Charlottesville, Virginia. A number of years ago, he became a great friend, and unbeknownst to him, maybe he became a mentor. He made me get more curious about society and get more curious about cultures and how our interactions, our bubbles kind of bumping into each other, affects each other, and how we shape hospitality and how we shape the other great equalizers like sport, art, and music to get to where we're going, and how our journeys crisscross each other. So having said that, Craig, thank you so much for joining TaleFeather. You're going to be episode 1 on season 2. This is going to be such a great way to kick off season 2. Can you please give our songbirds out there in the sky that is the world an intro about yourself, maybe a short bio?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Nick. It's great. It's great to be on your podcast and to start off season 2. That's fantastic. I can kind of trace where I'll tell you what I do now. I'm what's called an applied ethnographer, meaning I study group culture for organizations of all kinds, whether they're consumer brands or NGOs or trade associations or government agencies, to try to help them better understand the people that they serve and the people that they interact with. So an ethnographer studies group culture and understands why that culture exists and how it perpetuates itself. So it's kind of like discovering the why of the culture, if you will, to use your words.
Wow. Right on.
And I tend to focus on something that's even deeper than culture, or which powers a culture, which is called a narrative. And I've developed over the years something called framework around something called I call the guiding narrative, which is the story we tell ourselves about how the world works. And kind of the way I got there, I started out very early in life being very curious about conflict, curious why people disagree, why there are different versions of the world, if you will. So through that, I started actually in the hospitality industry after college, to talk to you about that. But then went to graduate school to study history and then study education, but ended up being trained as an ethnographer at that point. Had a couple technology startups along the way. I still dabble in the startup world, and I teach. I've taught over the last year entrepreneurship at the McIntyre School at the University of Virginia.
Oh, wow.
And I'm now an entrepreneur in residence at the Darden Business School. And all that means is just give perspective on, try to bring value to people who are trying to create things out of nothing, if you will, and contribute to the world. So my regular job is as a researcher, to help organizations understand people better. And so after having a few startups of my own, I got back into that, and that's my main focus at the moment.
Right on. That is pretty rad. I'd read that you were going over to Darden and got super happy. My very first educational seminar that I ever taught for spirits was actually at Darden,
Oh, that's great.
back when Lyons Brown pulled me into Altamar to
Ah,
start doing Ocho and Pia de Damas and Right Chin. So I taught a spirit seminar to a group of people, and it was probably the most fucking frightening thing I had ever done in my professional career because I understood the weight of Darden at that point, right?
yeah.
It was something else, man. You mentioned there that you did your college stuff. You trained quite a bit with or studied quite a bit under education and cultures and trying to understand conflict, which happens constantly in a third space, right? Whether
Hmm.
it's the meal's wrong or the drink's too strong or too weak, so forth and so on. It's real. You just made me super curious again, so I'm gonna start looking at that. You did mention that you did hospitality post college. So I want to
Hmm.
dive into that because I want to see how that shapes where you are now and where you go. Um, so what was it? I'm going to guess that this started somewhere. You said in your childhood about conflict, but maybe in the hospitality part of it, like where did you start getting the inkling or the itch to go over to the hospitality side to work in it?
Well, the funny thing is I didn't have an itch to get into the hospitality industry. I
Okay.
worked at a wonderful restaurant. I lived in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
I was going to school in Los Angeles, and I got a job, make some money working at a restaurant. A friend of mine worked there, got me a job there on the coast. It's an iconic restaurant called Moon Shadows, which just burned
Hmm.
down in this
Yeah.
last fire.
Yeah.
Uh,
Institution.
yeah, and so I was just working there. You know, at that one of those restaurants where the owner insisted that no matter you could be, you know, the governor of California, but if you started there, you'd start as a busboy, right? You had to work your way up.
Yeah.
And so I was working as a busboy.
Hmm.
And then I finished school because of my incredible attendance record in school. I had to take a couple extra quarters of college. And so I
Right.
ended up graduating in the spring. And I was just at that point, being trained to be a waiter at that
Hmm.
restaurant. I did my time as a busboy, whatever, 6 months, 8 months, whatever it was. And then because I was graduating or something, the manager was, they brought in a new manager left, they brought in a new manager, asked me if I wanted to be assistant manager. I said, sure. I didn't even know what I was doing, but I said, sure, I can figure this out. I had actually had some experience managing organization stuff during college. So I had a little bit of management experience and experience working with people, and I've always been in organizations and stuff, but still, I didn't really know that much about restaurants. So that happened. And strangely enough, about a month after that, the owner switched managers around and asked me if I wanted to manage the restaurant. And I said, I mean, my intention most of my life was to go to law school after college. I was a little burnt out, though. I thought, yeah, maybe I'll work for a little bit, get some experience. That job landed in my lap, and so I ended up being the GM there for about a couple years, and then
Hmm.
worked there subsequently many years after that. But I just went on to some other things, and I knew, interestingly, I knew at one point, I said to myself, am I going to be in this business the rest of my life or not? And if I'm not, you know how taxing it is, you know what a commitment it is. So
Yeah.
I decided I wasn't. Sometimes I think that was a wrong decision, but I decided it wasn't, because here I was, 22 years old. I was living like a king in Malibu and working with wonderful people at a wonderful place and having an incredible experience. But it was probably one of the most pronounced learning experiences that I ever had. Number one, because I was young and stupid and just was open to learning. And
Hmm.
two, because of the environment was so challenging, not only because of what is the normal challenges that go along there, but here I was, not kind of a novice, managing people who had worked there for many, many years and were very experienced.
I
And
bet they were
yet,
super excited about that.
and they were actually okay about it. They were kind of
Yeah.
okay about it, but you had to learn how to navigate that, right?
Yeah.
You had to learn how to navigate, I guess, being an authority, but at the same time, respecting the experience other people had and figuring out how to. And that's just on the staff side, and of course, on the public side, there's a whole other.
Yeah.
This was a clientele that ranged from, very recognizable celebrities to people that would come from inland for their one big night out for the year was to come to the beach and go to dinner and that kind of thing. So you had to navigate that as well. It's very diverse clientele, but everybody was looking for some special treatment, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. I mean, you're Moon Shadow, you're on the coast. It's one of the most romantic esque beaches and one of the most iconic beaches in the world. So
Yeah.
that's a tall order, man. I'm really just jazzed that you got to experience that at such a formidable age. I mean, we all like to think we're full grown adults in our early 20s, but I don't really think that happens until
Yeah,
you're in your
I'm still
40s.
waiting, so we'll see.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah, I saw, all the memes that pop up. I think one of my favorites, one of my top five will always be, we're still figuring this shit out along
Yeah,
the way. Our
yeah,
parents did the best they could.
yeah.
We're all just kind of throwing these rules and we turn it's just a bunch of clay that we turn into something at some point. Um, so you mentioned organization a lot there, and that kind of matches up, mirrors what you're doing professionally. What skill sets do you think that type of role, so a GM role, sets you up that are what I like to call cross pollinators, things that you can use elsewhere in your life, right?
Oh,
So, like, what kind of skill sets I know what I think they do, but
yeah.
public doesn't want to hear what I think right now. They want to hear what you think they do because um, they. I don't think people that run restaurants get enough understanding on how difficult it can be, how rewarding it is,
Mm-hmm.
um, and ultimately what we're responsible for. Because restaurants typically are not the end all be all landing spot for most of the staff that comes through. There are career people that will be there
Right.
for a number of years, right? The institution like SCOMA in San Francisco rings a bell to me. People are going to be there for 20, 30 years, sometimes longer. Um, and I think that's honorable. I think it's amazing. Um, they figured out that way of life and did it. But what do you think running restaurants prepares you for if you decide to go into other sectors?
Mm-hmm. And this might be a trite thing to say, but because I've heard it said, but we kind of, at least in this country and most of the world, we assume that you go to school and then there's an expectation that a lot of people go to college or trade or something like that afterwards. So
Yeah.
you kind of have this train that you're on or this roadmap to education. I think everyone should experience being in hospitality or retail or something of that nature because it is actually where humanity comes together in a sense, but from a personal standpoint, from a personal development standpoint, think about what you have to do. You're public facing, so you don't have any control. You have some control, but not a lot of control. Who's going to walk through the door? What are they? What are they carrying with them? We used to say that at Moonshadows, people came there to get engaged or divorced. It was like, and when the restaurant burned down on Facebook, everybody's saying, "Oh, my first date was there. I met my husband there. Blah blah blah. blah. We got engaged there."
Yeah.
And that's what it was like because it was a special place that people went to for special occasions. Most people, and then
Yeah.
the locals would file in and out and that kind of thing. But so this person comes through the door, or the composite of all the people that are in there at any given moment. It's a new thing. You don't have complete control over it. So
Hmm.
you have to figure out how you're coming at the world, if you will. So how are you going? The only thing you can control is yourself. So how are you going to respond? What are you going to bring to that experience? And how are you going to manage to navigate that experience? And I think, and sometimes, in a busy restaurant, it can change in an instant. You have, of course, everybody probably that's managed a restaurant has a story of, bizarre things that happen that you don't expect. And how are you going to handle that? And so what I
Yeah.
think it teaches you, and with staff also, I mean, I was a young person and I was trying to figure out, you didn't like to fire anybody. I was responsible for everything at that restaurant except literally writing the check. So I had to hire, fire, inventory, whatever it was. So I mean, that's a big responsibility, and
Yeah.
So what do you? It's constantly teaching you about yourself and reading other people and figuring out what's really happening here and what are you going to bring to that moment. And I think that is one of the best training you can get. And there's not many instances where you have that ongoing constant flow of opportunities to learn that, if you will.
Yeah. I'd say very few nowadays. Um, it it's when they say it's like herding kittens, they're not lying. It's a bunch of kittens of all
Yeah.
different types of personalities running around and doing their thing. One of the things that really mystifies me is how a bar director, bar manager, floor captain, chef, GM, whoever the figurehead is, and most of the time there's two or three of us on duty, but very often there might just be one on a weeknight, right? So, um, how does a manager? And I'm going to go back to the original question after this. How do you affect groupthink? Because you said that you're setting the tone for the restaurant. You never know what's going to walk in through the front door. There's a lot of variables at play when you look at it scientifically. So when you boil down to the groupthink aspect of it, because I know how I'm going to react. Well, I don't know how I'm going to react, but I have a general sense of, because I meditate every day, of how I'm going to approach a situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, First by listening, right? But how do you get that into a groupthink mentality so that you don't have the server that's popping off, as the kids say? We said that before we started taping.
Yeah.
Have the kids that pop off. How do you rein all that into a groupthink?
Well, I think I was fortunate because, as I said, I think there was a culture there already that I was trying to either perpetuate or improve any way I could. And the people that worked there were great, and they were, you know, this is a little cliche too, but it was the beach after all in Malibu, and so most of the people
Yeah,
were pretty cruisers. They were mellow. They're not people that are gonna really cause trouble from a staff perspective. Every now and then you had people that you know didn't get it, kind of thing. But I think most of the time it's by example. And
hmm,
when you think about restaurants, it's like a stage. You're always on, you're always performing, you're always, again, encountering things that you have to respond to. How are you responding to that? What is your
yeah,
nature? What is your tone? What is your demeanor? What is your, what little, you know, uh, interpersonal tools are you using? Right.
hmm,
And so I think you do set the tone in that sense by example, and also in time and in taking opportunities to demonstrate that maybe in the most public way possible. So if something's happening, you kind of make sure that you are performing in a way that you would like someone to emulate and that they know about it, right? And
yeah,
so they can kind of do a big thing. But I think that does set a tone because they do look to see what culture is about, what is acceptable and
hmm,
norms, right? So culture is
hmm.
about, okay, if I did this, would that like fit in or would that be consistent with what other people are doing? So you try to set that tone, I think, as much as possible and take every opportunity to do that.
Did that stint in hospitality directly influence, or maybe indirectly influence, your decision to study culture and to become an ethnographer? Is there a point of inflection where you're like, I really want to understand. Like for me, I love logistics as well. So I like to go
Hmm.
to, I'm this idiot. I go to Vegas, I do my work, and then I go pop a seat in a hotel and just watch how the entire place
Yeah.
breathes. And I'll
Yeah.
do that for hours sometimes. I
Yeah.
did that in the Venns lobby once with a friend for 4 hours, and it was wow, what an experience that was.
That's a
So
great
did
lobby.
it's an amazing lobby.
Yeah.
Um, was there like an inflection point or anything like that?
I wouldn't say that hospitality did that for me. I think
Right.
that I was naturally drawn in some ways to hospitality.
Hmm.
I think my idea about culture started when I was a kid. I think I
Gotcha.
grew up in an era where there was a lot of conflict, even more
Yeah.
conflict than now, I think. And so
Mhm.
I wondered about it, and I was just curious about it. And my passion at that point was somehow to become a lawyer and do something about it, not from a like sue everybody kind of thing, but maybe like constitutional lawyer or something. So I actually
Yeah.
had this motivation to try to correct what I saw, even as a small child, what was kind of going on in the world, trying to understand it. But I will
Yeah.
say that I was drawn to hospitality. I was brought up in a family in an era. My parents were very social. I think I began bartending at age 12. Don't tell anyone. Uh, it was
We
it
have
was a
that in
lot.
common.
It was during an era when that was whatever.
Yeah.
And my parents always had parties. They again were very very social. My father also ran trade associations, so he was
Uh,
always putting on big meetings
mhm.
and kind of knew how to make his way through a hotel and through a restaurant and take care of everybody and et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of was comfortable with that kind of environment. It wasn't like, never had that kind of social phobia, never had that, was like, oh, this is just one big party here,
Yeah.
so, but I will say though that it definitely gave me a different look at people because people are also on display. Customers are on display in restaurants too. And
Oh yeah.
because we had such a diverse, like I said, a diverse kind of crowd, uh, you know, uh, it was interesting to see how people conducted themselves. And you could learn a lot about people, and that's a little cliche too, but I think you can learn a lot about people, about how they conduct themselves in a restaurant, in an environment where they technically have power over other people, but you know, sorta, but
Yeah.
there's expectations. There's people who understand the dance, and then there's people who don't understand the dance. They just expect whatever. So
Yeah.
I think that part, and of course, like you said, sitting in the lobby. I mean, I was able to just sit and watch people all day long, and all kinds of people. So I think it definitely helped my abilities and the things I look for and stuff like that. And it's like a reference, just like when I was younger, I played team sports. Definitely have references to that in business and other things that I'm doing. Or persistence or practice or whatever it may be. I think there are cues you learn in the hospitality industry that you refer to
Hmm.
when you're in a situation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you could draw upon that.
Yeah.
So I'd say it enhanced my curiosity about culture and people and that kind of thing.
Right on. It's very interesting, and your line of work obviously interests me quite a bit. I tried to model the little bit that I do know about it when I go out into the world. For those of you that are just joining this season, my partner and I, my spouse and I, were nomadic for 3 years, and we've just signed a lease to be back in Virginia for a year before we figure out what else is going on. And Craig had given me enough curiosity, if you will, to take a step back as a tourist. And then some of my other friends, like Laura Louise Green out of Chicago, and a couple of my other hospitality friends that deal in cultural phenomenon, I guess is the easiest way to sum it up, made me try to understand. Well, they didn't make me. It made me want to understand. Um, our influence when we touch another place and how much of a mark we leave indirectly. And it
Yeah.
really makes you think about, especially when you walk into other cultures, third spaces, like in Japan, for instance. I'm a bald dude. I can sweat pretty easily. There's no hair to catch sweat. So I didn't know that when you were given your is it umaboshi, the
The
hot or
towel.
cold cloth,
Uh-huh.
depending on what season it is. I can't wipe my head. That's considered very rude. You don't wipe your face. That's
Yeah.
considered very rude. You do your hands, you fold the dirty part in, you lay it down on the table. Where and they get it. They see Americans or Westerners come in and they wipe their hands and they leave the cloth on the table so you can wipe your fingers while you're using your chopsticks, which you're also not supposed to do.
Yeah.
So you start to understand your effect on a micro scale because, as they say, every little thing matters because it eventually turns into a snowball. So, and you can directly influence and shape culture without even knowing it.
Hmm.
So, for what you're doing um, in organizational ethnography, is that what you
Well,
referred
I refer to applied ethnography, meaning that
to?
it's not for science per se; it's for solving problems. That's the way I
Okay.
think of it, or addressing challenges, or bringing value, whatever it may be that someone's trying to do. Yeah,
Okay. So let's do a time travel. Are you ready to do a time travel? We're going
sure.
to hit 88 gigawatts. And what was his saying? Anyways, doesn't matter. It'll come to me later. We'll be at the end of the episode, and I'll go, "Great Scott!" There it is. We're going to take a time jump. Everything you know right now, all the stuff you've done and worked so far in your career. Um, if you were to take a time machine and jump back to the golden age of the 1980s, how would you observe the perceived notion of what we think the nostalgia, if you will, of what we think the 1980s hospitality scene was like versus what it actually was using
Hmm.
your skill set?
Hmm. So I have that's a broad term, hospitality. I mean, I was never I limited exposure to the club scene, which was a big
Yeah.
part of the 1980s. Really didn't like disco.
Gotcha.
Went to a few discos. Went to a few underground clubs in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
but it really wasn't my thing.
Gotcha.
First of all, I was busy for the early
Yeah.
part of the 80s working. As you know, you're always working when nobody else isn't. So,
Yeah.
my idea of hospitality then was, or what I participated in, unless it was traveling, were restaurants and bars that I favored, and late night diners, if you will. There were
Yeah.
some
Love those. Yeah.
great ones in LA that no longer exist, which is really
Mm.
disheartening. Um, so I think I can't speak to the club scene
Hmm.
very intelligently, other than what I've seen in movies.
Yeah.
But I think I don't. First of all, I have to ask, what is the nostalgia? I mean, what is that sense of nostalgia for the 1980s? And I can tell you whether or not I think that was accurate.
Okay. I would educatedly, whatever, for what it's
Right?
worth, because of the movies, because of I'm a late Gen Xer, so I'm at the end of Gen X.
Yeah.
Still Gen X at the heart, tried and true. Um, what I experienced was pastel colors, big hair,
Oh yeah,
um,
the hair was horrible.
shitty drinks,
Yeah.
drug fueled, crazy nights out, fast cars, big hair music. I mean, it was, if you take all of the bullshit off of it, it wasn't really that different than the 90s, I guess, or even the early aughts, because it all boils down to people's behaviors. It's just the cosmetics
Yeah.
of what it looks like.
So certainly then it was what's the word I would use? I, I don't know if you would call it tone deaf or just not. I don't know. It, I used to go home smelling like cigarettes, right? So
I
I
did
just
too
remember
until the late
yeah,
aughts. Yeah,
waking up in the morning and smelling like cigarettes, and I don't smoke.
yeah.
And the we had this quote unquote smoke eater. So here you are, with the Pacific Ocean just lapping up on your restaurant and sitting outside and just gorgeous weather and just young, healthy people, as your servers and stuff like that. And of course, the most ridiculous thing was that the smoking section ended one table next to the non-smoking section, which was I'm old enough to remember smoking on airplanes, and there was
Oh
smoking
wow.
section. They still say on tickets, actually, smoking, not smoking. And that was preposterous, right? And so there's things like that. And I guess maybe what I'm thinking is that the emphasis was on different things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just about, the owner of our restaurant was all about quality. Like, you had to buy the best meat, you had to buy the best everything. But,
Mm-hmm.
the experience was, there was so many things going on that I guess maybe the food and the drinks were of a different, they certainly weren't as advanced or sophisticated as they are now. There wasn't, I don't know if the term mixologist existed then, maybe it did, but you didn't go to a bartender and think, are you a mixologist? It was like, can you make something pretty basic?
Yeah.
So it was pretty straightforward, basic in terms of the food, pretty straightforward, basic in terms of the drink. It was all about, I guess, the experience. Um, and I know that people experimented with different themes and different things back then.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a while to get to where we are now. I mean, I would say now, the culture is a lot about the food, and it's a lot about the cocktails, and it's a lot about the creativity and artistry of what you're doing. Which I don't. Maybe what I'm thinking in my mind was back then it was a little more blunt force. Right? It wasn't
Yeah,
as
that's a
artistic.
good way to put it. That's a good
It
way to
wasn't
put
as
it. Yeah.
artistic as it is now.
Yeah. Lots of steakhouses versus gastropubs.
And that's what we
Like
were. We were a steakhouse, salad bar.
yeah.
Granted, a very good steakhouse, but it was.
Yeah.
But that's what it was. It was pretty much straightforward. The menu was simple, and that was our experience. But even most places you would go to, it didn't have the same kind of artistry I think people think about now.
Gotcha. I
Yeah.
think that, keeping on the theme of culture and impact, I think that things like the Food Network, even the cooking shows on PBS, like the Frugal Gourmet, or is it Cook with Yan, Yan Can Cook, like things
Mm.
like shows like that. I think started the globalization of food. And America, one of my favorite. I'm gonna misquote this, but I'm gonna get as close as I can. The show Chef's Table, I think, is what it is, and Ed Lee
Mm.
is on there out of Kentucky, and he said American food is actually a melting pot. It's whatever an ethnic group brings over, and how that food relates to another ethnic group that's already there, that's already been American influence, and then how that influences the flavor moving forward. Um, so I think it's a pretty cool phenomenon and industry to be in right now. I think it can be a little unnecessarily pretentious, personally, but art is pretentious sometimes,
Yeah.
and sometimes it needs to be comforting, and sometimes it needs to be challenging. And I think the equalizer of the third space is one of those things. We don't have to. For those of you listening and watching, I haven't covered what an equalizer is. An equalizer is a part of our lives that we don't need to share a common language in. So it can be
Hmm.
faith, it can be art, it can be sport, it can be music, it can be food. We don't need to share a language to have that shared experience together, and that's what I'm interested in looking into, and why I'm talking with Craig today, and why we're listening to this esteemed gentleman is because the equalizers bring us together. And in this time of division and in this time of separation and purposeful division and separation, I think it's ever more important that we find these equalizers and we join in these communal experiences, whether that's through faith, if that's what your thing is, or sport, I'm a big baseball nut, so I'm super excited. We're about 10 days away from pitchers and catchers reporting. Um, so it's the third space is important, right? And that's what we're getting at here. Now let's take the time machine back to current times. What is it like to walk into um, a third space these days? Like, I know from my side, third spaces are, meaning restaurants, bars, pubs, taverns, they're struggling. They started
Hmm.
struggling during the pandemic because the foot traffic wasn't there anymore. People weren't commuting to and from work. Neighborhood bars started to kind of pop up in the burbs again a little bit. And we had this amazing chance to correct all of the bullshit that we had been doing to each other through the past 3 or 4 decades, and we chose not to for whatever reason. Um, but what is it like going into a third space now for you? Because you do see the world differently, right? Like an artist sees lines. Like when I'm painting for time and time and time again, and I'm in my sketchbooks a lot. When I look up, I'll see lines and shapes instead of actual objects. It's just something that happens to your brain when you're concentrating.
Yeah.
So when you go into a space, what's it like now?
Yeah, interesting. I have two lenses, both of which I think we talked about. One
Hmm.
is as from a perspective of having managed a restaurant. So, once you do that, you see things that other people don't see for good or ill.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, you do.
you notice things. Although most of the time, I don't think that way. First of all, it was a long time ago. Second of all, I can set that aside. Like I don't, I just go, for the experience.
Hmm.
But the other part of it is, yeah, from what I have spent my life doing, which is examining what how people place meaning on the world, how they come at the world, the narrative they have about how the world works. This guiding narrative, I I apply that in a kind of right at large to an organization or to it's a a restaurant or a bar or whatever you want to call it. If I was about to say facility, but not a facility, like I'm losing the word, right? Like an atmosphere, an
Yeah.
environment maybe.
Okay.
Um, so to me, you can walk into an environment. So there's probably two categories. One's the ones that I frequent because I seek them out and
Right.
I like them and enjoy them and it does something for me. And then there's the ones that I've never experienced before and experience it anew and what happens when you do that, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I think for me, I'm looking at kind of how the people respond to you, how
Hmm.
they how they're performing in the sense of what they're like I say what they're bringing to this experience, and which tells you a lot about what they think about it and why they're there, right? Why we're all there, like you said,
Hmm.
So you can tell a lot about how a person conducts themselves. Uh, uh, you can tell a lot about how the meaning they place on what they're doing and where they are, that space, right? So more in new places, I do that, right? I'm just fascinated by that anyway. Whether it's hospitality or even any kind of environment, I'm fascinated by that. So that's an experience for me. So I'm experiencing the restaurant or bar or hotel or whatever it is on the level of, wow, how is the food? How is you know, how is everything? How's quality of everything? What is it like? And then I'm also experiencing it on the human level of, what are people doing there? Can you tell that they're there because they have to be there? They're there because they're just in and out, or
Hmm.
maybe that's also true, but they're also recognized that this is their role. This is what they're trying to accomplish for that evening. This is what their intention is. This is what they're bringing to it. So I
Hmm.
definitely have both of those experiences going on at the same time. And the places that I frequent, um, I'm just looking to it's like coming home. It's like a connection. It's an experience that I have an expectation I'm going to have a certain experience. I'm going to refuel on that experience. And it's just part of the tapestry. It's just part of my life. It's just part of, the everyday kind of thing.
You just said a word that nailed it, the tapestry. Because
Hmm.
all of these, the third spaces, the businesses around them, homes around them, the markets, the food purveyors, the drink makers, so forth, the transportation system. It's all a tapestry of what society is, right? It's an
Right.
integral part of that tapestry. Um, so let's look at the phenomenon of taverns closing. There's a lot. Like I was gone from Richmond for roughly 3 years. It was 3 years ago on February 22nd that we left. So 22, 22, 22. Did that on purpose. So I'd never forget it. And coming back, I just saw the 86 list, meaning places that have closed
Yeah.
for Richmond in 2024 alone. And a few of them, not third spaces, but like I needed to get a water bottle, a squeezy bottle from a bike. So I went over to a store and it's no longer there. Right.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, that somebody's family is affected by this. Multiple people's families are affected
Hmm.
by this. This community is affected by this. So what, what, what does the closing of a third space like a tavern or pub in a neighborhood do to the culture of that neighborhood?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you personally, and then I can tell you what I think is not that different for most people is it's a loss, right? It depending on how, whether it was your place or not, place you went to all the time or
Hmm.
not. It's all part of, it's just all part of little bit different pieces of you, little different pieces of the community. And when something goes away like that, you just, it's a signal. It's a signal that, certainly not everything is permanent.
Hmm.
Uh, Nothing's really permanent. And it's also, uh, having to adjust to something that's been part of your life is changing. And so you feel it personally, I think, if you pay attention to your community. If your community is important to you, you take it personally. Um,
Yeah, I can see that. Different places in different worlds celebrate the local spots differently, right? So like,
mhm.
and you're going to hear me reference Japan a lot on this season because we spent such a large amount of time there this
Yeah,
past year, and in Thailand, in Portugal. Um, but in Japan, for instance, here in the US, we don't have what I would consider a robust rail system. I mean, it's good, it's okay. It can get you from point A to point B. It just
yeah,
takes forever. Um, but in a place like Japan or Portugal or the EU, for instance, you don't really need a car. You can get pretty much anywhere on public
right.
transport and a little bit of walking, which I think all of us could use a little more of.
Hmm.
The the train stations are like miniature cities, right? And they're
Right.
hubs for people. People go there to hang out. I know it sounds crazy, America, but you go to the train stations to hang out. There's malls in them. Character Street, for instance, in Kyoto is where all the Pokemon, and it might be Osaka. I'm getting things confused at this point. But you go there to see what that is, and they're culturally significant. I think that we are remiss in the U.S. quite often about how important the local spot is. I'm not
Yeah,
saying that national accounts, things that are like TGI Fridays or Red Lobster or any of that aren't important. They are very important. Again, they support communities. There's people that economically suffer when places like that are not open.
yeah.
Red Lobster, low key, is one of my favorite places to go. I love Cheddar Bay biscuits. Um, I'm not supposed to eat them, but I will. I will eat 3,000 calories in 5 minutes if you allow me to. The the local spots, how they affect communities, how important they are to for that person that's traveling, that's staying in that neighborhood to be able to go and have a good meal, how important it is for that person that might be struggling in a familial relationship to be able to go and just sit with their emotions and read or have that steam valve of a lager. Or maybe it's being able to sit out on a patio and talk with the passerbys and look at dogs. Like it could be a number of things, but they're integral. And I would say just as important to some people as church would be to others.
Hmm.
It's a place to be yourself, to be open. But I think it's also important to understand, and you touched on this a few minutes ago. The people that work in the restaurant are not the only ones on stage, y'all. Um, you're observing us, and we're observing you, and we're taking cues off each
Right.
other and how to interact with each other. So, like,
Right.
if you were to come into the Commonwealth and sit down, and you were quiet that night, I'm going to ask you how you're doing. I'm going to give you your space. We're going to fix you an old fashioned or a Vucare or whatever it is you're drinking that night,
Hmm.
and we'll chit chat when you want to, right? But if you come in
Right.
and you're congenial and you've got a date with you and you're Nick, this is so and so, we're gonna have the menu. I know what to do at that point, right?
Right.
And I think that the spaces interact with the neighborhoods that way. Like if you
Yeah.
have a night, like you're throwing a tiki night at the space, okay, well, there's a lot of people in the neighborhood that know that tiki thing's going on. They're going to come in and see you.
Right.
Or if you're doing industrial metal night, maybe they won't be coming to see you. Who knows? I like industrial metal, but it's weird like that. And I think in the US we have a different view on what hospitality in those third spaces are versus what maybe the rest of the world does. I mean, there are definitely cocktail bars all over the world. We like to think that we're in this macrocosm of culture when it comes to cocktail bars, but it's actually a very small segment of what hospitality is. I'd say cafes and taverns are probably, and pubs are probably the largest segment, especially in Australia and the EU. And even in places like Turkey, there's pubs and taverns everywhere, but cafes are the top tier. Um, and we're starting to see a little bit of European cafe culture trickle into the US, which I'm super excited about because it's
Hmm.
my favorite spaces to be in.
Hmm.
Um, do you think there's a US view on hospitality and how it affects the global third space view and how that's adopted in I guess the vice versa for that? Like you go into a place in like let's say Shoreditch and you're in this amazing cocktail lounge, but it's definitely got a touch of influence from the US because these things were kind of born here versus them coming into here. Like there's you've got to get up to New York soon and go to Schmucks. They moved over from the EU. You're going to love it, I
Mm.
promise. But bringing the idea of Schmucks over and going into, is it New York or Miami? I think it's New
Uh,
York.
yeah.
99.99% sure they went to New York. I should know this, but I've been gone for 3 years. That's my excuse. Um, do you think there's a cultural exchange there? And do you think it rubs people maybe the wrong way sometimes? Or if I don't want to focus anything on the negative, but I think we also need to be aware of like I would love to open a bar in Chiang Mai. Like I would love, or maybe Koh Tao or Krabi or somewhere in Thailand.
Yeah.
Virtually impossible because of the way work is set up there. But do you think there's a cultural exchange there that messes with the fabric, the tapestry?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of things to unpack there because, first of all, I'm not the world traveler that you are. I mean, I've been to Europe, I've been to Brazil, I've been to, you know, certainly other countries, but not a lot in Asia.
Right.
Um, so, and it changes too. So I'm not, I don't know if I can speak to the influence. Certainly, we try to incorporate things here. People go and they learn things and they travel and they try to bring it back, kind of thing. Um, for example, the gentleman who owned my restaurant started a whole line of Latin American style restaurants where what they weren't
Hmm.
Mexican. They were like, this was back in the 80s, and he was experimenting with Central American food, and
Oh
because
wow.
of his travels and stuff, and it was really kind of fascinating and interesting. So people bring things back. I think we live in an era now where, with the internet and with the exchange of ideas and communication and photos and food porn and all these
God, yes.
shows on TV, you have travel shows, and that you wouldn't have, they wouldn't fit on a network schedule before, but They're streaming so our exposure is just dramatically different now. So, and then you have TikTok, and then you have Reels, where people are showing you how to make new dishes and turning you on to new foods. So I think there's that cross pollination and influence and curiosity that's going on like never before because of that communication. And I having said that, and you see, even in Charlottesville, we have a variety of different, nationalities and cultures represented in the food scene, and people are curious about it.
Honestly,
yeah, and people love it, and New York, of course, and just about any major city now will have a good influence, but that's separate from the local character. It's separate from. Like I could talk about what Charlottesville is like versus DC versus New York in terms of the local character, if you will. And I think that is important. And I think it's important for people who live here or live in a particular town to have that. But also that you're right. When people travel, they want to experience that and they want to know what that's about. And so I think both are important, and I think food is an international language like music and anything else. So when people can experience a variety of foods and learn about cultures, it's always great. So I would encourage that cross pollination when it's not necessarily obnoxiously imposed.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. The quiet part, guys, is don't culturally appropriate and not give a nod back to what you're taking from. I think.
Right.
Yeah. I'm really interested. You just brought up, and Jeff White. This is for you, my friend. I don't know if you remember Jeff. He was a lead server at Commonwealth when I was there. Now this dude is he has grown into one of the best bartenders I know. Like he is amazing at what he does. He's at Experimental Cocktail Club up in New York. Really good dude. Still playing music. I love this kid to death. I say kid because he's always going to be my sidekick. I love the guy. But he's up in New York, but he started in Charlottesville. You brought up the comparison between the two. So I've got to hear what your take is on those two very culturally different geographic and cultural areas. But like when it comes to what we're talking about today, how would you diagnose those two?
Well, it's interesting because I actually do get up to New York a lot, and then of course New York has different neighborhoods. So it depending on what neighborhood you are, and I hear people in New York all the time decry that a lot of the local places are going away in place of chains and stores. Same thing, big box stores and stuff like that. But there's still very much a local character to a lot of places, and the thing I noticed coming to Charlottesville was that Charlottesville has an interesting food scene. It kind of punches above its weight, just like the music scene does. So there's definitely some people who have trickled in from other areas that have experience from different cities and have open places that are really terrific. As a general rule, though, and I always feel this way every time I go to New York, is I can't remember having a bad meal in New York. And I also, with some exceptions, and the reason I say that is because the bar, I think, is much higher. There's just a norm. And I'm sure I could go to a place and have a bad meal, but I don't recall having a really bad meal in New York. And also the level of service, the attitude towards service is different as well in most places, obviously not all.
Yeah.
There's just Charlottesville doesn't quite have the level of the assumption about service that they do in New York in general. Of course, there's exceptions.
Yeah.
And and I think has to do with probably, there's more in New York. There's more, but, it's an international city and there's expectations are high. And to survive, you have to be good. and
Yeah.
the training just trickles down and that kind of thing. Whereas in Charlottesville, it's a little more casual. I don't think that you would think that there'd be a large pool of people because of the university and stuff like that, but there isn't necessarily a large pool, and people kind of I don't know, the culture of service is a little bit different.
Yeah. I would say almost mountain style Malibu-esque. Very laid back, very
Yeah,
approachable.
yeah,
New York to me is a little more hustle, a little
hmm
more je ne sais quoi, if you will, like just a reason of I need to turn. You're welcome to sit here for 3 hours. I just need you to order for 3 hours. Where in Charlottesville, it's like you're welcome to sit here for 3 hours. I just need you to order three drinks.
yeah,
It's one of those types of things. Um, yeah. Well, this brings me to the end of this episode. I really appreciate you being on here and just dissecting and discussing everything culture related with the hospitality sector and these third spaces, and trying to get us to understand a little bit more and be a little more aware of what we are, how we um, bump into each other, how our bubbles overlap, if you will. That's why
hmm
this episode is called Venns and Vespers, is Venn diagrams and Vesper martinis.
yeah,
There's I also really like alliteration. So there you have it. That's the secret. I like alliterations. You're going to see it a lot. Um, I do appreciate the time.
oh,
It's
it's been
you
fun.
keep me super engaged in wanting to understand my own why. You
hmm
keep me super engaged in making sure that I'm thinking about the reciprocity. I'm probably gonna have to edit that word out.
Reciprocity.
Uh, reciprocity on how my interactions influence others and how others are going to
hmm
influence me. And I think that's really important. All of us. If there's a lesson in this episode, folks, it's what that word that Craig just said. I'm not going to try to do it again. It's being aware of your influence and your actions on culture and their influence and actions on you and how those two things relate.
Yeah,
Um, and having that third space, that equalizer, so that we can understand each other better. I think we're all going to be in a better place if we are mindful and we take the time to try to understand each other better. There's
yeah,
lessons in there from multiple scriptures across the world. I'm not going to Bible beat you. I'm not going to Quran beat you. I'm not going to Eight Noble Path beat you. It's not my place or this platform to do that. What I'm going to ask is that you just be aware and you look at these third spaces and realize that they're important, and that if we don't frequent them, they're going to go away. And I want to make sure that Craig and I can sit down at your local bar at some point when we get to see each other in person again and share a drink together and
yeah.
converse with the service staff.
I can leave you
Um,
with just a couple comments if you want.
yeah, I would love.
Just some thoughts about the whole hospitality thing in life in general. Is like,
Yeah.
I think the origin of the word guest is stranger. And
Mm.
when you think about hospitality and you think about life in general, and I think it was Ram Dass that said, we're all just walking one another home, right?
Oh, that is
And
beautiful.
and so where does that happen? And the other thing about studying culture and change is imagine if things did not exist, right? If this third space did not exist, what would our lives be like, right? So when you think about
Yeah.
the idea that a place that provides hospitality and provides that third space is providing a way for humanity to an opportunity to humanity connect and as you say, help each other, learn about each other, bring value to each other, and that kind of thing. If it didn't exist, you'd have much more limited opportunities for that to happen, where people of different kinds of orientations would come to one place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ever more important now than maybe any time in modern times. Um,
Yeah.
folks, songbirds out there listening, you know who I am. He's Craig Honick. We'll see you next time on TaleFeather. Until then, keep your wings flapping, keep your guidance set, and be kind to each other. We'll see you on the flip side. Um, Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks, Nick.